My name is not important. I am just an ordinary person with an ordinary life. But I have an extraordinary dream. I love writing stories. Every night, when most people are sleeping peacefully, I sit alone and try to create stories for you. Sometimes there is no proper light in my room. Sometimes the electricity goes away, and the darkness surrounds me, but I don't stop writing. I may not have an expensive computer. I may not have a beautiful studio. I may not have bright lights, a comfortable chair, or all the things that successful creators have. But I have a heart full of stories. And I have you. There are nights when my eyes become tired. My hands hurt, and I feel like giving up. I look around my small room and think, maybe nobody will ever read what I write. But then I remember that somewhere, someone might be waiting for a new story. So I continue. Sometimes I write with very little light. Sometimes.
Number 1. I was an exchange student from Malaysia and was placed in Missouri in 2006. They were a family of 4, son and daughter, and they lived somewhere around Webster Groves. They looked nice, warm, and welcoming, but it was all a facade, for they were trying to gain my trust. Coming from a country where all neighbors are practicing a million different religions would kind of desensitize you or make you very aware. I was the latter. The first week was fine, but sometimes I would wake up a little early and find them gathered in the kitchen in a circle, around the kitchen table, mumbling and whispering. They'd stop as soon as I entered. It was very disconcerting, but I brushed it off thinking it was an American quirk. During the second and third week, it became worse. The boy wouldn't touch me because I'm born from sin, his words, and the girl was afraid of me because I spoke to the father whilst looking him in the eye. I started prodding her for answers whenever little things that I did, which are normal by the way, like reading before bed, talking directly to the parents, eating a sandwich, would elicit small gasps and hyperventilation. She told me that I have residues of the wicked and that I'm going to hell. She told me about a cleanse and a daily prayer wash. I've seen them singing the same hymns over and over again, reciting the same verses in different tones, and it really freaked me out. I wasn't stupid. I realized I was in a cult when they took me to church. I was made to sit in the front, and the pastor was conducting the service specifically for me. I realized it when I looked around and saw that everyone was looking at me. I felt like I was in a horror movie. Wide-eyed, silent stares. Men and women were separated. People wore different colored ribbons on their wrists, and the children looked haunted or just plain frightened. Nobody spoke to me or even came close to me. The men never looked me in the eye, and the women whispered and shunned me. I went there twice. School was on break, so I had to stay in with them. Many weird things happened, but none was as bad as waking up in the middle of the night to find the mother sitting next to my bed, reciting verses from the Bible in the dark. As soon as I'd awake, she'd stop and silently walk away. The family began treating me badly after that. I was punished for being out of line. No dinner, locked in till morning, no sweet drinks. I had to cover up with long sleeve tops, long pants or skirt, etc. I think I only lasted because I was curious. They probably thought since I'm from Southeast Asia, I must be quite gullible and naive. They tried brainwashing me about how sinful I was, how lost I was, how the world is going to end and I'll be dragged into hell unless I accept their teachings. I was there for a month before our chapter coordinator came by for a visit. I told her everything, outside the house naturally, and I left with her immediately. We came back with a group of people from the exchange organizations about an hour later and found them in the midst of burning the things of the sinful non-believer. Thankfully, my passport and other relevant documents were untouched. I never found out what kind of cult they were. Number 2. I want to try to be concise and still give a proper breakdown of my time growing up in a cult. I'm going to start by breaking down the ideology. Second coming of Christ. They believe the second coming is, or was, alive. He was a Korean man who went by the name of Reverend Sun Myung Moon. He was given the mission by Jesus in a vision when he was 16 years old on a mountaintop, and it is his purpose to create an example of the ideal family so all may shape their families in its likeness and create an ideal world. Restoration of the fall. Jesus forgives your sins, but what about restoring humanity to what it was before the fall by paying spiritual indemnities and cleansing humanity of those sins in the first place? Their idea of indemnity is almost like paying karma forward. You can put yourself through misery to either pay for past mistakes of humanity or to ensure good things will happen in the future. You can pay indemnity by 1. Living in a van for years and years on one of their task force fundraising by selling candles or wind chimes, sometimes more than 14 hours a day. 2. Getting an arranged marriage after abstaining from absolutely any contact with the opposite sex all of your life by the Reverend himself, or now your parents, thereby overcoming the temptation of the fall by denying your desires and obeying the church completely. Actually, this is the most important aspect of the church, that you'll get matched and blessed. Their word for marriage is the only thing that will eventually restore humanity. 3. Converting other members. 4. Doing hundreds or thousands of bows to a picture of Reverend Moon every night for X amount of days. 5. Taking cold showers every day for X days. 6. Fasting. You can drink water for a providential number of days, either 3, 7, 21, or 40. Now note, you must do a 7-day fast before you can get married. 7. Giving money offerings to the church. The church also started charging for ancestor liberation in the last couple of decades. Just like old school Catholics, you pay to have your dear old granddad hoisted out of the pits of hell. Since the church is Korean, they have deep resentment towards the Japanese, and ancestor liberation can be thousands of dollars per person liberated. For Americans, it was a little over 100, I think. 8. Beat yourself to repetitive chants at an approved spirit cleansing event. 9. Or basically denying yourself of any human comfort or need for some time. Some do sleep deprivation conditions. There's a lot else, but I can't keep going. Growing up in the church, there are countless strange rituals in the church. Like on your birthday, you and your whole family have to wake up at 5 a.m., go to your altar of Reverend Moon, say a prayer, and offer food. When the ritual is almost over, the birthday kid usually has to take the food and offer some to each of the family members, and you always leave some on the altar. There are countless stories told to the second generation, or children born from marriages approved by Reverend Moon, since we're supposed to have been born as purely as Jesus without original sins. Stories of members who left the church and immediately got hit by a bus, or became prostitutes and died of ODing, or killed themselves out of guilt. Now, Korea in the church is seen as the New Jerusalem, Koreans being the new, chosen people. Every leader in the church is a Korean, despite the religion's heavy unification of world cultures and religions overtones. Koreans often were only matched to other Koreans. None of Moon's kids were allowed to marry anyone other than a Korean. Japanese members have always been the church's cash cow, guilting them into paying more in tithing and overcharging them for everything. Americans got their fair share of that too. The church often comes up with a new ceremony, like a holy wine ceremony, where drinking this new blessed wine, usually juice, will heal you of all your sins, that of course you have to pay to get into. Sometimes they just make a big plea for extra money, like their total life offering, which was something like, if you paid the church $16,000, you would never have to pay them for anything again, which was a lie. Some members took out second mortgages on their house to pay these offerings. I will say, in response to people in this thread who ask how someone could fall for this, and how people could stay in it for so long, cults like this never approach it like, hey, a Korean guy is the Messiah, you want to join? They take you through steps, almost like Scientology, but not so clearly defined. The Unification Church was going around in America in the 70s preaching for true love and family values, stuff many people, especially people with Christian backgrounds, can get behind. The church does have heavy Christian influence, so much that the language is the same, but they'll start discussing things with you, like the evils in the world. If Jesus restored the world, then why would there need to be a second coming? We should prepare ourselves for the next Messiah. A Messiah is exactly what we need. How else can we right the wrongs of this world? Once you get them going on that, you just pump them with all the same religious feel-good stuff. God is our Father. God is watching out for you. He wants the best for you. God hurts when you don't do what's right. And eventually God becomes some kind of emotionally sensitive dude you have to coddle and take care of. Then, once your members are pumped, they're living in vans, they're trying to recruit other people. That's when you start with the deeper shit. You know, the Messiah is here. The tension has been building to this moment for literally years. The members are overjoyed and can't wait to do anything this guy says so they can be like Jesus' first disciples. Now, no one thinks they're a victim. They think they're literally saving the world. It appealed to a lot of people who were raised Christian, but were dissatisfied with the contradictions or shortcomings of their parents' religion. Number 3. I was married to a Scientologist. Well, Scientology is weird. It's all-consuming, as most cults are. My ex-husband only knew and associated with people in Scientology. However, all his friends were actually very, very nice and really cool to me. I made a lot of friends through him. I never felt outwardly pressured to join Scientology, but the insidiousness was absolutely there, and I'll get to that. Ex-husband was raised in it. You could say he was a second-generation Scientologist. His parents joined back in the L.R. Ron Hubbard days, and they were in it. They both worked for the church as auditors. They were dirt poor, all of their money went to the church. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. They were so deep in debt, they had no health insurance and no money for anything except rent for their tiny, run-down apartment. That part made me the saddest. They were nice people. Now, I married him back when I was younger, more idealistic and willing to overlook major differences. I was a bit lost myself and really just looking to connect with anyone. I was always atheist and actually really against organized religion, but he always assured me that Scientology was not something he was active in and that it wouldn't be a problem. He wasn't taking any courses at the time we dated and were engaged, so I believed him that Scientology was more like his parents' thing than his. After we got engaged, he started telling me how a friend of his needs some help. She was training to become an auditor, the e-meter thing you hear about, and needed someone to practice on. I declined. He kept asking and insisted that it's just for her practice. It doesn't mean I'm doing Scientology and that it would mean a lot to him. So I did. And what a silly experience. Honestly, it's just ridiculous. You sit in a room with the auditor, hold these cans. Let me tell you, the rigmarole they use to get the cans set right so they pick up your wavelengths, or whatever they call it, is laughable. Lotion on the hands, squeeze the cans. That didn't work? Go for a walk, drink some water. Lotion again, squeeze the stupid cans. All this over and over until something on the auditor's end says it's all working now, and then you're good to go. I lied through the whole thing. They acted like I made some amazing breakthroughs. I got a floating needle, and then that was it. However, I was then called over and over and over to come back. What the hell? I thought this was a one-time thing to help this chick out. Nope. They were all over me. They wanted 3-hour sessions, days in a row, on weekdays. No wonder Scientologists are all poor as shit. They want you in constantly during work days. I became so disagreeable to them that they actually gave up calling me to get me in. I guess they figured me being married to one of them is enough to eventually get me. The Scientologists on the lower portion of the bridge tend to know nothing about the Xenu stuff. I asked them, and they acted like they'd never heard of it. I guess you don't get to read that tech till way later, a few 100,000 deep. The overriding insidiousness I saw was the learned ability to scam people. I witnessed a Scientologist's own business get taken down by the feds for frauding their clients. Now, the reason I divorced him was because he stole a large sum of money from my account that was not to be touched. It just vanished, and he had nothing to say for it. He opened 2 credit cards in my name and maxed them out. He put me into financial ruin. It was a disaster. Number 4. I was born and raised in a cult, and considered myself a member up until I left my parents' home at the age of 18. The group I was associated with is not well known, but the effects on the members are tragic and undeniable. We were literally brainwashed. We had weekly services with a set program: 3 hymns, prayer, sermonette, hymn, announcements, main message, hymn, prayer. It never altered from that layout. As well, the messages we would hear were often videotaped sermons from maybe 5 main people at headquarters. The topics were extremely narrow: prophecy, the end is coming, self-improvement, all of you suck and you should hate yourselves, setting ourselves apart, don't talk to worldly people, they will taint you. There were many ways in which we were indirectly encouraged to harm ourselves. Many people looked down upon modern medicine and felt that using it was a way of turning away from God, slapping him in the face, making it clear he wasn't needed. I personally knew people who died for their faith, waiting for God to heal them. On the other hand, when any of the main leaders fell ill, they were immediately rushed off to receive medical care. They controlled our diet. We pretty much were kosher, though they denied all influence or association from or with Jews. There were annual days of fasting, and whenever the leadership could scare up enough drama within the members, they would declare a church-wide fast so we could all get closer to God and resolve our issues. We fasted when the church's income was said to be dropping. We fasted when the leaders were ill. We fasted when people died. We had our own personal fasts for the hell of it, or when we felt especially guilty and out of touch with God. Parents were encouraged to get their children involved as young as possible. My parents tell me I started observing the annual fast when I was 3 years old. I remember one year when my brother was 2 or 3. At one point during the day, he just broke down sobbing because he was so thirsty. And yeah, we abstained from food and drink. We got obscenely dehydrated every time. Looking back, I just don't understand how a parent can behave that way. And they were so sex negative, I can't even describe it. We spent so much time and energy frantically thinking, I can't think about sex, that it was all we thought about. It was evil, dirty, wrong, and it would hurt if we weren't married. I literally built up so much fear over it that when I did finally have sex, as an unmarried adult, I had literally developed vaginismus, a sexual pain condition. The cause is often psychological. In my case, being so afraid of it hurting, that it hurt, which further fed into my fear. There was actually an entire message once where one of the leaders took on the subject, "Are we a cult?" And he actually went through a checklist with us. His conclusion that we were a cult, but that it was a good thing. We should be proud, only not. Pride is a sin. We should be pleased. You had to be baptized before a minister would marry you. You couldn't be baptized and marry someone else who wasn't. You couldn't marry outside the church. Some ministers wouldn't baptize you if they thought your only incentive was to get married. There were rampant cases of sexual abuse from the leadership, but we were always too fearful to report it. Always taught that it must have, in some way, been our fault. Traditional gender roles were enforced, i.e., women stay home, pop out babies, cook and clean. Men were to work and support the home. Having children, and lots of them, was strongly encouraged. Be fruitful and multiply, and all that shit. Adoption was frowned upon, even for those who were unable to have their own children. So many families were living in poverty because there was just too many children to take care of. God forbid that any of them have a medical condition that required constant treatment. We were robbed on a regular basis. They called it tithing. not only did we give 10% of our entire income, but we were also to set a second 10% aside to be used at a 7-day religious convention of sorts every year. And on every third year, we would give an additional 10% to the church. Imagine losing 20% of your income every year and 30% every third year. Imagine being poor to begin with. Imagine being told you are poor because you have been literally stealing from God by not diligently paying your tithes. Growing up, my favorite thing in the world was going fishing with my 2 older brothers. We lived in a very rural area and would often hike out into the woods to go to various creeks to go fishing. We never really caught anything big in the creeks, but it wasn't as much about what we caught as much as it was about spending time with your brothers fishing. Stereotypically, we always got up way early in the morning on fishing day. We would begin hiking out to whichever creek we were going to and would watch the sun as it stole across the sky. It would be fully light outside as we got to where we were headed to. The scariest thing to ever happen on a fishing trip, of course, happened the first time that we had gotten to a new creek. We had set out that morning, determined to go further into the hills than we normally did. We passed by 1 or 2 of our regular fishing spots and kept going deeper and deeper into the woods. We found an absolutely amazing spot. It was thickly wooded, but the creek was huge. It was beautiful and even had a fallen tree stretched out over it. After we determined that it was sturdy enough, the 3 of us made our way over to the other side of the creek. We sat our stuff out and began to fish. The day wore on, and we weren't really catching anything. The fishing got boring after a bit, so we decided to do something we normally didn't do. Like I said, the creek was huge and it was quite deep too, so we decided to put aside our fishing poles and go swimming in the creek. I really don't know how long we had been swimming when I noticed that our middle brother stopped doing anything and began staring off in the woods. Our oldest brother asked him what was wrong, and he just motioned to the woods. "There's someone out in the woods, watching us," he said. My first thought was that some pervert was out there watching us, but when I followed my brother's finger pointing out towards the woods, those thoughts quickly evaporated. Standing off in the trees was a huge man. It wasn't too dark that we couldn't make out some of his features. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, which struck me as odd as it was pretty warm out. He had a baseball cap on his head that was sitting low over his face. But the most striking feature he had was that he was holding what looked to be a rifle or shotgun in his hand. We weren't sure what to do. Going into the woods, we knew that we were trespassing. We never actually knew whose property we were on, but we did know that the places that we hiked and fished on didn't belong to us. Except up until this point, we had never gotten caught before. Both of us younger boys looked at our brother for instruction as to what to do. He seemed just as worried as we did, though, and didn't give us any direction. He just kept looking at the man standing there and watched. My brother suggested we try and get ourselves over to our stuff, take it, and leave. However, this was daunting because that was the side of the creek the guy was on. We slowly made our way over to our things. However, before we got to shore, an old hag came running out of the woods, shrieking like a freaking banshee. I got startled and fell back into the water, struggling until my middle brother pulled me back up again. The old nasty woman actually ran over to our things, our poles, and our clothes. She started grabbing the things and screaming, "Mine, mine, mine, mine!" She was gathering all of our things in her arms, dropping a few of them when she had too much in her arms. "Hey, stop that!" my oldest brother yelled, and began to try and move faster to the shore. My middle brother reached out and put his hand on his shoulder and pointed back to the big guy in the woods. When we moved back towards the shore, he began moving closer, and he held the gun up as he walked. "Holy shit!" I distinctly remember yelling. "We're sorry we trespassed on your property," my middle brother shouted, but they didn't pay any attention to us. "He's not gonna shoot us," my oldest brother said, and began moving towards the old hag to get his things. As he did, though, the old woman saw him, and she took a fillet knife out of her pocket and started waving it at my brother. "I'll cut you," she screamed at him, her arms still overflowing with our things. By now the big hillbilly was by the shore of the creek, and he had the shotgun cocked and was pointing it at my oldest brother. He, of course, stopped in his tracks. It was a tense moment as we stood cold in the water with this guy pointing his gun right in our faces. Once the woman had gathered up our clothes and fishing gear in her hands, the guy said one thing to us: "Get." We didn't have to be told twice. All three of us swam to the other side of the creek, got out of the water, and got out of there. It sucks because we had to walk through the woods in nothing but soaked shorts. We didn't even have shoes, and the twigs and rocks and leaves hurt our feet, but we were too scared to even consider going back. We fortunately did not get chewed out for losing our stuff. Our dad told us that there are some messed up people out in the woods, and we had to be careful. It was a long time, though, before we were brave enough to go fishing again.
Growing up, my fraternal twin brother and I shared a room. I think both of us would have preferred to have our own room, but our dad used our extra room for a study. He was a lawyer and needed it as his office at home, I suppose. Anyhow, I slept on the top bunk, and my brother slept on the bottom bunk. The worst thing about sleeping on the top bunk is that I tend to have to get up several times a night to go to the bathroom. I guess I must have a small bladder or something. I also drink a lot of pop, which probably has a lot more to do with it. Or it might have had something to do with the fact that my brother tosses and turns all night, and it wakes me up over and over again. One night when I was 15, when I went to bed, I noticed that my brother had already gone to bed. I had originally intended to stay up and read in bed for a while, but couldn't turn my light on if my brother was asleep. Instead, I took my Android up on the top bunk with me and decided to play some games on my Nintendo emulator app. I played an old Dragon Warrior game with the sound off. Right on cue, no less than an hour after I got into bed, my bladder started telling me that I had to get up. So, trying to be as quiet as I possibly could, I put my phone down and got up and went to the bathroom. I did my thing, and then I came back into the room. When I opened the door, the light shone in my room for a second, and it must have bugged my brother a little bit because he grumbled something, flopped over, and was quiet again. I quietly apologized, but he didn't reply. Trying my best to not wake my brother up again, I climbed up the ladder, back onto the top bunk. I noticed when I got up there that my cell phone light was blinking green, which indicated that someone had sent me a text message. I picked up the phone, wondering who would be sending me a text that time of night. When I tapped the screen, my blood froze in my veins as I read a text from my twin brother that simply asked, "Hey bro, I'm gonna be out late with my girlfriend. Can you cover for me?" At first I thought it was a joke. My brother could have sent the text to me from the lower bunk when I was using the bathroom. It was the sort of thing that he may have done. I slowly texted him back. I thought that if he responded, I'd be able to see the reflection of the light on the wall from his cell phone. I asked him if he was joking. Immediately, he texted back and said, "No, why would you think I was joking?" I didn't see any light. I answered and said that I just saw him sleeping in the bunk below me and that I didn't find this funny at all. The text back from Ian was almost immediate. He told me that it was definitely not him in the lower bunk, and if I was not joking, I had better get out of that room immediately. Scared half to death, I grabbed my phone, skipped the ladder, and jumped off the bed and ran for the door. Despite what might have been better judgment, when I opened the door, I had to look back and see who was sleeping in my bed. Part of me still suspected it was Ian playing a joke on me. However, when the light shone on the bed, it was empty. No one was there. Freaked out and confused, I turned the light on. No one was in the bed. I crept slowly over to the bed and looked under it, half expecting to see a face looking back at me. No one was there. I looked in the closet. No one was there. I guess the fact that there was no one there should have made me not scared, but it was scarier. I ran out the door and went to my parents and explained what had happened. I hated to throw Ian under the bus like that, but if there was an intruder in the house, I thought finding that person was more important. My parents and I searched the entire house, but we didn't find anyone or any indication that anybody had broken into the house. I wasn't able to go back to bed until Ian got home. It was just way too creepy. I never knew what I saw in the bottom bunk that night. All I know is there was definitely someone there.
It's taken me a long time to tell this story. I'm 27 years old now, and this happened to me when I was 14. My name is Adam, and I have one older brother named Seth. I haven't seen Seth in 13 years. I have no idea where he is, or even if he's still alive, but I do know why he left. Seth was 2 years older than me, and we were very close. Although all brothers tend to get into scuffles with each other, with Seth and I, they were few and far between. For the most part, he and I did everything together. He taught me how to fish. He let me play football and baseball with him and his older friends. Although Seth was bigger and stronger than I was, he always sold me to other people like I was superior to him. He told people I was smarter than him. He told them I was the talented brother who was going to be so much more successful than anyone could dream of. I really loved him, and he was easily the best friend I have ever had. Around the time I turned 14, however, Seth began acting very odd. At first, I don't think my parents thought much of it. He was wearing black all the time and seemed like he was really depressed. Rather than hanging out with me or even his friends, he took to spending a lot of time alone in his bedroom. He obviously kept the lights off all of the time as well, because there were no lights coming from under the door. It may have seemed like typical 16-year-old boy sort of stuff, and that is likely why my parents didn't pay it any mind. But I was closer to Seth than they were. I knew him better than they did, and I knew that this was not typical teenage stuff. Hell, I was a teenager at the time, going through a lot of that myself. With Seth, it was something more. I would walk by his room at night, and I would hear him talking to someone. I never heard another voice, and I always chalked it up to the fact that he must have been talking on his cell phone. But the conversations were never pleasant. Whomever he was talking to, Seth was always at odds with that person. Whatever it was that was bothering my brother, he never told me. He never was angry with me either. He would say hello if I greeted him, and he always offered me a friendly, if not extremely worn-out smile. But rather than do anything else or say anything else to me, Seth would immediately go into his room, lock himself in there, and I wouldn't see him again for the rest of the day. After a couple of months of this behavior and no sign of stopping it, I was sitting at my computer doing some homework. I was having a difficult time with it, so I decided to take a break and chat with some friends on Yahoo Messenger. This was long before the days when Skype and Facebook were the norm. I got a message from an unknown user. I don't feel comfortable sharing the real name, so I will just call it Yahoo Stranger 1. This person sent me a message telling me, "If you don't keep far away from Seth, I'm going to kill you." At first, I was too alarmed to say anything, but after I composed myself, I messaged the person back. I told him that Seth was both my brother and my best friend, and I would hang out with him whenever I wanted. The person didn't respond. I kept sending him a message asking who he was, but he only responded, "You've been warned." I wanted to confront Seth about this, but he refused to talk about it. When I mentioned the message to him, there was a little bit of recognition in his eyes, but he just forced a very wary smile, tousled my hair, and told me there was nothing to worry about. He would take care of it. That was the very last time I ever saw my brother. The following day, he didn't come out of his room to go to school. I went up and knocked on his door at my mom's request, but he didn't answer. My parents tried to get him out of his room as well, but the door was locked and he didn't answer. My parents had to eventually pick the lock on the door, and when we went in, Seth wasn't there. What's more is that many of his things were gone, and there was a note on his bed that simply said, "Goodbye." My parents, of course, called the police and went through the whole missing child procedure. But it wasn't until I curiously turned on the monitor to Seth's computer that I got a little bit of information on what was going on. The very first thing I noticed was that Seth's Yahoo Messenger was up, and there was an open conversation. The conversation was with my screen name, and Seth's screen name was Yahoo Stranger 1. It was him that had sent me that message. Seth had also left his cell phone behind. I suppose this was to keep our parents from being able to track him. Remember all those times I thought I heard him arguing on the phone with someone? He had no calls in his history other than from my parents. If he was arguing with someone, it was not on the phone. But the true scariness came from the fact that there was a long and detailed conversation on the Yahoo Messenger. It was between Yahoo Stranger 1 and the screen name that we knew was Seth's. The conversation was horrid. Yahoo Stranger 1 was telling Seth over and over again to hurt me. There were these grisly and disgusting things that the messenger was telling him to do, and Seth's responses were adamant that he loved me and he wasn't going to hurt me. There was a message that night, the one after I told Seth about what had happened, that was the scariest. Yahoo Stranger 1, who I assumed now was Seth, told Seth to kill me. Seth refused and argued with him and pleaded with Yahoo Stranger 1 to leave him alone. I could tell in the messages that the conversation was causing my brother a lot of pain. Trying to figure out how Seth could have been having an instant messenger conversation with himself, I looked at the timestamps of the messages, and each one was at least 5 minutes apart. He had the passwords saved on his messenger for both accounts. I figured he had to sign out and sign on both names repeatedly, answering the messages since Yahoo only allows you to send offline messages. I don't know if Seth is schizophrenic, or if he has dissociative identity disorder, or if Yahoo Stranger 1 really was a different person. But what I am sure of is that the constant threats against me were what was weighing heavy on my brother all those months. And I have no doubt that the reason my brother, my best friend, left was that he was afraid that he actually was going to hurt me. I keep hoping he'll come back one day. He's my brother, and I love him, and I could never be scared of him.
My older brother was one of those people who liked to scare me and my other siblings as much as possible. I couldn't really blame him for it because, although I didn't like being scared myself, I was just as guilty as trying to scare our younger brothers and sisters as well. But kids are allowed to be a little hypocritical, aren't we? The thing that always scared me the most was this big old house that my brother and I walked by every day on the way to and from school. The town we lived in didn't have bus service for any of the kids who lived in the town itself, so we had to walk to school. It was a good half-an-hour walk. The house that my brother always talked about was a really old Victorian that of course looked like it hadn't been kept up in decades. The lawn was completely dead and there was not anything but brown grass. An old dead tree was in the backyard with a decayed tire swing swaying from it. Old broken bicycles, tricycles, and other contraptions littered the backyard as well. There was an old rusty shed there too. There was never a car in the driveway, and we never saw anyone leaving or entering the place. But we knew that someone lived there because if you walked by in the evening, you could see blue lights shining from behind the curtains as if somebody was inside watching TV in the dark. Whenever the two of us walked by the house, my brother would always make strange comments about what was going on in there. I had to pretend like it didn't scare me, but I was only 12 years old at the time, and I was quite easily scared. He would tell me the man was a butcher who preyed on the little kids in the neighborhood who were stupid enough to walk up to his front door. My brother said the old man would grab the kid, take them out to his shed, hang them from their feet, and then lightly slice their skin open with a fine knife, and then slowly let them die as the blood trickled out into a tub that was under them. Growing up, every time he was in the mood to do it, my brother would dare me to go to the guy's door and break one of the old pots on it. I always declined because I told him I didn't want to get in trouble. He would then make fun of me for being a scaredy cat and taunt me for hours. On Halloween, the year that I turned 12, rather than going trick-or-treating, I was invited to hang out with my brother and his friends. They were doing what we at the time considered mature things. We egged some houses. We lit a flaming bag or two. It was a fun night. Late in the night, my brother and his friends decided to haze the new guy, being me. They dared me to go up to the old Victorian house and break one of the pots on the porch. As much as I wanted to be accepted by my brother and his friends, I did not want to do that. And they taunted me for it. And it was humiliating. But my fear was much stronger than the humiliation, and I continued to refuse to do it. When the taunting got really bad, I angrily blurted out to my brother, "Well, if you're so brave, why don't you go do it?" My brother hadn't expected that, and it worked perfectly because one of his buddies immediately turned to him and asked him that as well. Suddenly, all the attention was off of me, and it was turned to my brother. He was really taken off guard by the development. Still, my brother had to prove that he had the guts to do it. It was one thing for his little brother to be taunted, but he knew he could never live it down. So, acting all brave, although I could tell he was really scared, my brother walked up to the porch of the old building. You could tell he was scared out of his mind, but he didn't let it show. When he got up the steps, he grabbed an old flower pot and pulled it over his head. As he held the pot above him, proud of himself for what he was doing, I saw the door open behind him. A huge man walked up behind him as he was about to throw the pot. His buddies started screaming at my brother, telling him there was someone behind him. He just looked at us all like he didn't believe us. He just thought that they were trying to scare him. As he dropped the pot on the ground and it shattered, though, the guy grabbed my brother around the neck and held him there. My brother's chicken friends all ran off immediately. I couldn't do that, though. My brother had just been grabbed by a lunatic. I ran up to them before the guy could pull my brother into the house and tried to pull my brother away. The man swatted at me several times. He was huge, and he was choking the life out of my brother. Not knowing what else to do, I realized I had to take the cheapest shot possible. It was the only way I could help my brother. I kicked the guy square in the crotch. He groaned in shock, but he didn't let go of my brother. So I kicked him again. And again. I kicked this huge man a total of 6 times before he finally let go of my brother. Although my brother was wheezing and struggling to breathe, I knew we had to get away from the recently sterilized psychopath, and I pulled him away. It was difficult, but we were able to get out of his yard and down the street before he was able to do anything. Our parents called the police, but get this, they wouldn't do anything about it. My brother was not only trespassing, but he vandalized the guy's porch. We were all shocked and my parents were outraged, but the police did absolutely nothing. This man got away with it. Now, I'm the first one to admit what my brother did was wrong, but the guy was strangling him. Afterwards, my parents drove my brother and I to and from school every day. They figured it was best to avoid the guy as much as possible. The one good thing that came out of this was my brother had a lot more respect for me. It was at least 2 months before he began ragging on me again. But that's how brothers are.
Back in my early 20s, I was trying to kick a major 4-year heroin addiction. Like I said, trying. On my own, which meant that I wasn't using as much and it would be months in between. On this fateful day, someone had given me 2 OC80s. This was when the price of such goodies hasn't reached the almost $100 a piece mark. I had never seen these. They were fairly new on the streets, so after getting off of work at the little coffee shop I worked at, I popped the 2 teeny tiny treats in my mouth and hopped on the train to head into Boston to go see one of my fave punk bands. Now, anyone who knows about kicking a habit, when you start to use less, your tolerance goes down. So number 1 rule there is use less than you're used to. And I had no idea how strong one of these things were. And like I said, major habit. So of course I took them both. And for those who don't know, 1 OC80 is enough to let a 200-pound junkie feel good. So being a 110-pound girl that hasn't touched the stuff in a couple of months, I don't even remember the show. Never mind do I know how I got on the train and off at my stop. Anyways, by the time I got to my ratty little borough of Beantown, I was throwing up every 20 feet or so. I could barely keep my eyes open, but I didn't live in a very good part of the city, and curling up on a corner and hoping I didn't die was not an option. So I propped myself up along the walls and was trying to inconspicuously hurl while trying to make the 5 blocks to my apartment. I was about halfway there when I noticed a shitty car going really slow behind me. I figured whoever was in it was looking for a hooker. The part of town I lived in, anyone could be a hooker. So I just turned and looked at him and shook my head. This was usually enough to get them to drive on. It wasn't. Guy pulls right up to me in this 30-year-old crappy green Honda or something and says in a very thick, what I'm guessing, and please don't tear me apart for not knowing, Korean accent. "You need help? Get in, get in." The man looked to be about 30 and of Asian descent, dressed in jeans, blue tattered t-shirt, and I kid you not, a tux jacket. That has nothing to do with anything. I just thought it strange. Living in Boston, you see some strange stuff. Now, even being a junkie, punk chick, I was always a polite girl who was so nice to strangers as to not hurt anyone's feelings, and because of this, I would get myself into dangerous situations, and I knew this. So I just wiped the puke off my mouth and smiled at the guy and said, "Thanks, but my boyfriend is waiting for me just down the street." There was no boyfriend, and I actually had quite a bit of blocks to cover, but I was nice, not stupid. Well, not that stupid, considering the pill-sickened state I had put myself in. Mr. Man says, "You're sick. You need ride." Okay, guy can't take a hint. I told him again that I didn't need a ride, but thanks. I started to walk faster and cross the street. Unfortunately, it was a one-way, and he pulled up close enough to the curb that he could grab me from the driver's seat. Alright, now I'm getting scared. It's almost 3 a.m. and no one is out on this side of the street. "No, you get in now." I was feeling really sick and embarrassed at this point. I was trying to hold off throwing up in front of this guy, and I know I'm about to hurl again and getting pissed. So I yelled, "No, I know get in now. Look, dude, I'm not gonna suck your dick, so just fucking leave." And then I puked. Now, I was always on the small side and hung around and lived in places where it was a good idea to have some sort of protection. Tonight I had my gravity knife tucked in my boot, so when Mr. Good Samaritan started to get out of his car as I bent over. I pulled it and let the blade slide out as I stood up and said, "Please, just leave me the fuck alone." His eyes focused on the knife, and he got back in the car. Like I said before, his car was a piece of shit, so when he took off, it was really loud. I watched him turn the corner and started back on my wall crawl home. As I turned the next corner, lo and behold, there he was at the end of that street. He took off again when he saw me stop and stand there looking at him. But the whole way back home, I would either see him or hear his muffler. I still hadn't put my knife away because I knew if he actually got a hold of me, I was in no condition to be able to get him off of me without a lucky stab. He actually drove by me as I was fighting to open the door to my crappy little duplex. My roommate and I lived on the bottom floor, but once I got in, I felt pretty safe enough to crawl to the couch and pass out because my roommate's big-ass skinhead boyfriend was there with her and his pit something mix, who was a love bug, but smart enough to know when not to be. When I finally woke up the following evening, those things hit me really hard. My roommate told me she couldn't believe I had slept through all the ruckus. Apparently the dog had started barking around 4:30 a.m. and wouldn't stop, so they let him out of the room and tried to go back to sleep. But Rudy wasn't having that. They came back out to tell him to shut up, and he was running back and forth between the back corner window and the window behind the couch I was passed out on, which was the actual backside, finally standing on the couch over me and going batshit crazy, acting like he was trying to bite through the friggin' glass without me waking up. My roommate later told me she had checked to make sure I hadn't OD'd and died. This was the point where my roomie's boyfriend decided to go check out what the heck his dog was trying to kill. He grabbed the bat we kept by the door and made his way to the back where the window met the couch. He heard a lot of noise going on the other side. Living in a crappy part of the city, there was a lot of crap around the building. And then a car starting up, a loud car. By the time he ran to the front, the car was halfway down our street. When he made his way back around to check the window Rudy was trying to eat through, there was a bunch of crates to move from under the first window he was barking at, stacked up under the window where the couch was, and the screen had been cut where you put your fingers through to open it. I always read these threads where people say, "I'm getting goosebumps just writing this," and shake my head thinking so overdramatic. And now I feel like an a-hole, because there really is no way to describe how you feel reliving this. Over the next few weeks, the boyfriend and Supermutt stayed at our place because we kept hearing noises, and imagined or not, it scared the hell out of us. Quite a few times the boyfriend would run out when we would hear something, and would sometimes even catch a glimpse of the guy as he went around a corner, but he was never fast enough. Boyfriend would blame it on the guy being ninja fast, but we just knew he was too slow. Some may ask why we didn't just let Rudy out. This was a point in time in my state where they were thinking of outlawing pit bulls. They had a really bad rap. If we had let him out, Rudy would have caught him, and that would just end bad on a lot of levels. But seriously, what kind of person still tries to get into a house with a psycho pit bull and a 6'2" skinhead trying to kill you with a baseball bat? Now you might ask why we didn't call the cops. Well, like I said, I was into some bad stuff, and as a rule, punks don't like cops. However, the neighborhood I lived in, we all talked to each other, and some of them were cop callers. My next-door neighbor knew what was going on and called the cops one night when she heard someone in her kitchen. She lived alone. She locked herself in her bathroom and started yelling that the cops were on their way, but the guy was persistent and was trying to pick the lock from the outside until he actually heard sirens and booked it. The lady said she heard a loud car start and looked out the bathroom window that faced the street to see, you guessed it, a crappy old green car drive away. When I heard about this, I felt really bad. I mean, this lady was like 87 or so and lives alone. What would have happened if that dude got in? Why, oh why didn't we let Rudy eat him? When the cops finally got there, the three of us were outside, so they started asking us if we heard or seen anything. So we told them what had been going on, and I gave a description of who I had thought was doing it, but also said I wasn't sure of details because I hadn't been feeling well at the time. The cop that was writing it down almost threw his pad and pen down, saying that if people like us, punk rock, smarted up and called the police, they could have got this guy. Apparently Mr. Get In Now fit the same description as the guy they were looking for that was wanted for quite a few sexual assaults around the train station. Now I felt really bad, but still had to give the cop lip over the people like us statement. But that's not the point. I've been clean over 15 years and don't live near town anymore, so I'm pretty sure I would handle things different now, and I know if I hadn't been messed up, then I would have. As far as I know, they never caught the guy. So Mr. Get In Now, let's not meet, 'cause I will let my dog chew your ass.
I use Tinder pretty frequently, and it's usually cool. Just meeting people, chilling, smoking with most of them. So, I match with this guy named Charlie, and he seems cool. He's really cute, and he plays music, which is really appealing to me, as I also sing and play the piano. We talk for a little while, and I agree to meet him at his house. Mistake number 1. Why did I think it was a good idea to meet a stranger in their home? I don't drive, so I take an Uber over, and it's a decent way away, so it's kinda pricey. When he buzzes me into the apartment complex, I got this really creepy vibe, but I shook it off as just nerves. I go up to the 3rd floor, and he's standing at the door. Things are cool, we're just chilling. We smoked a couple of bowls, and we're watching a movie. So, he makes a move on me, and I go with it. We end up on the bed, and we're obviously engaging in adult activities, when out of nowhere, he wraps his hands around my neck. Hard. Now, that's all fine and good with me. I mean, I can dig that in the right setting. But alone in a stranger's house, when he didn't even check to see if it was cool, is not one of those settings. I literally can't breathe, and I'm fairly certain I'm turning blue at this point, and he's just relentless. Not only is he asphyxiating me, he's now yelling in my face. Are you scared? I started to struggle, and he was gripping even harder. I seriously thought I was going to die. By some miracle, I wriggle out of his grasp and start screaming. He's yelling at me to calm down, and I'm frantically trying to put on my clothes. He grabs my wrist as I'm trying to leave, and I use all of my strength to pull away and slam the door. As it was closing, the charming guy bid me adieu with the words, "Fucking cunt." I get home, and I look in the mirror, and I have a bruise on my neck. I tried to cover it with makeup, to no avail. I looked like I was almost strangled to death. Then, he texts me, saying, "I think you need more than one dick." And I'm like, really? You want to bring a friend and kill me together? Anyway, I blocked him and reported him on Tinder. I wish I could have done more, because I seriously think he would have killed me. I've been debating going to the police, but the bruises are gone, and it's a he said she said thing. But I'm really starting to wonder if I should. because the next girl might not be so lucky.
Despite a few creepy instances as a child, there has only been one time in my adult life that I have truly felt primal fear. I live in a village in the middle of the English countryside. To paint an accurate picture of its size, it has a population of 4,000, but feels more like 1,000 due to its spread out nature and being surrounded on all sides by lots of fields, farms, and woods that eventually connects onto a pretty famous forest. It's kinda in the middle of nowhere, and because of this, has notoriously bad phone and internet connections. Having lived here all my life, I know the place like the back of my hand. I know where all the public footpaths through the woods and fields are, where they connect, which are shortcuts, and where to cross deep streams, etc. I've gone on walks in this area throughout my childhood with parents and alone as an adult. Nothing bad had happened. I felt safe here. This story took place last summer in July, after I moved back home from university, had yet to get a job, and smoked a lot of weed. A habit my parents despised, and which I tried to keep hidden from them by going for evening walks, multiple pre-rolled joints hidden away in my hoodie pocket. As usual, this day they both got home at 5 p.m. We had dinner, but chatted for a while longer than usual, as my mom had had quite a hectic day and was telling me about it. Because of this, I ended up heading out for my walk an hour later than routine, around 7 p.m. But as it was summer, the sun was still shining, so honestly, I didn't really notice that it would start getting dark while I was still out. The woodland closest to my house is less than 5 minutes away, and you enter through a gate into a farmer's field. You can see across the open area quite far until the first set of small woods obscures your view. That's where I was heading, as I knew this track takes under 2 hours and leads back onto the same path I was standing on now. More than enough time to smoke the 3 joints in my pocket and for the smell to leave my clothing, I had thought. This entire area is very popular for dog walkers, so it's not unusual to see other people while you are about, and as this is a village, everybody says hello to everybody. I lit my first joint and started walking. I'm just in my own world for a while, until I was less than 100 feet before the entrance to the woods. An elderly man was coming out of them throwing a ball for his collie dog. I finished my joint and stubbed it out. As I got closer, I recognized it was John, who lived on the road next to mine and knew my grandpa. We stopped and said hello as I stroked his dog Max. While talking, I see another man coming out of the woods. No dog, bright green jacket, very tall, and had a good 10 years on me age-wise. Me and John chat another minute and say goodbye. He warns me not to stay out here too long as it will start getting dark soon. True, the sky was bright pink and orange. The sun was indeed beginning to set. I hadn't really noticed. I continued on down the path towards the man. When we were nearly passing each other, I look up to make brief eye contact, smile, and say hello, like everyone here does, even if you don't recognize the person. My eyes instantly met his. He was already looking at me. His dark eyes locked on mine. He wasn't smiling. I didn't know him at all, but I knew something was wrong. It was in his eyes. I swallowed my politeness and looked at the ground as we passed. I had lived in my uni city the past couple of years, so I knew a red flag when I saw one, and my country bumpkin manners evaporated. I quickened my pace a little, and before entering the woods, slyly looked back. The guy was still walking in the same direction, following John. I felt relieved, laughed, cursed the weed for making me paranoid while lighting up another joint, and started walking into the woods. It takes about 30 minutes to follow the path through the woods to the end. The pathway exited open into another field that led to another set of woods. The sky was now violet, the dimming light having been obscured to me by the trees. I was already smoking my last joint and was near the entrance to the second set of woods when I felt it. Fear. Complete, crippling, absolute fear worked its way like electricity through every layer of flesh. I'd never felt anything like it before or since, but I knew what it was. I whipped around. Standing at the exit of the first set of woods was the man. I could still make out his green jacket in the fading light. He fucking doubled back, and very quickly too. I had looked back several times while in those trees, and he hadn't been there. For a second I froze, as did he. He knew I'd seen. To sprint the distance between us would take him about 5 minutes. He was obviously in good shape. I threw the spliff and fucking bolted into the woods, the only way I could go. I didn't dare look behind me. I sprinted for a couple of minutes before taking a sharp left turn off the path into the trees, hoping to throw him off a bit, but I couldn't see a fucking thing. The light was already darkening, and the trees made it 100 times worse, especially as I was now in the thick of them. Their branches catching on my clothes like fingers, whipping and scratching my bare legs so bad I bled. I ran and ran, my lungs protesting in pain, hating me for smoking so much, while my heart was throwing itself against my ribcage trying to escape. I couldn't anymore. I threw myself on the ground behind a particularly thick trunk, my back against it, knees to my chest, hand thrown over my mouth to stifle my labored breathing, desperately trying to pump air into my lungs for the next sprint. I listened for the first time. A few seconds pass silently. Then I hear him. Heavy footfalls snapping twigs behind me, and about 20 feet to my left. I dare not look in case he sees me. I have my phone, but I know I have little chance of signal being where I was, and knew he'd either hear me talking or see the light from the display. I'm not ashamed to say at this point I start to cry, the tears falling silently down my cheeks. "What the fuck?" I hear a deep voice exclaim. "Where are you? I knew you're here. I saw you." I have to clasp both hands across my mouth to stop my scream escaping. I can hear him moving around. I panic, and I find enough courage to slowly peek from behind the tree. He was about 10 feet behind me, less than 20 feet to the left, with his back to me. I moved back, and my eyes search the area around me. I pick up a pretty heavy rock. I carefully check on him again. His back is still turned, but he's searching through the trees, hunched down lower to the ground now. I make a snap decision, and with everything I had left, I threw the rock behind me and to the right. It clattered through the branches of trees and made one hell of a noise. I watched him immediately bolt in its direction, laughing. He fucking laughed. I paused a little, hearing his footsteps get quieter, until I thought I wouldn't be so visible to him if I moved and threw myself forward. I ran, trying to put as much distance between us as possible, but I was also aware that I was getting further and further away from home. I knew there had to be a stream somewhere close. If I found the stream, I can follow it, as it borders the land and ran parallel to some of the footpaths. I ran and ran until the trees finally cleared, and I can just make out another field through them on the other side. I thank God, and push myself a little bit further till I'm out of the trees and the ground disappears from below my feet, and I go head over shoulders down the stream embankment. I crash into the water below, my open mouth and lungs filling with muddy water. As I splutter it out, I feel both relieved to have found the stream and terrified he's heard me. My phone is now ruined. I slowly make my way downstream as quiet as possible, listening out for him the whole time as the stream borders the woods, looking up periodically just in case. After a while, maybe half an hour, I notice the trees begin to thin out and realize this is the edge of the woods where I would have been exiting and where the pathway connected to the original one I'd started on. If I ran, I could get home in less than 20 minutes. As quiet as I could, I dragged myself on my stomach back up on the embankment army style, wanting to stay as low as possible. I peeked over the top. I could just make out the opening of the wood's exit path about 50 feet away. I sat and scanned the forest line for a couple of minutes, my eyes trying to make out movement despite it being pitch black. Nothing. I couldn't hear anything either. I pushed myself up and sprinted as fast as I could across the field onto the pathway. I knew the gate I entered through was in the adjoining field. It really wasn't far. I was so happy. "You fucking bitch!" came a screech from across the field. I swear my legs nearly gave out then and there. He had been waiting for me. I turned my head and saw him sprinting out of the woods at full pelt. I screamed and pushed myself further, tears coating my face. All I could do was run. I crossed into the main field now, and I could see the moonlight shining off the metal gate. My house was just 5 minutes away after that. I have never focused on anything as much as that gate. He was faster than me and getting closer, screaming at me the whole time about how he was going to slit my throat. I ran and ran, pushing myself up and over the gate and ran up the road. I dared look as I made the turning for my road. He was still fucking following me. I raced up my driveway and threw myself through the door, running into the living room crying and screaming hysterically, pointing behind me towards the door. My dad ran outside while my mom grabbed a hold of me as I collapsed, shaking. As it turns out, my parents had already called the police. As I said, I was going out for an hour or so at 7, and it was now past 12 a.m., and I hadn't answered when they had called my now broke phone. Very unlike me. We called the police again to explain. They came and I gave a full statement. Both my parents and the police were horrified. Nothing like this happens here. There hasn't been a reported rape or murder in the last 100 years. But one look at me, and it was obvious I was telling the truth. I was covered head to toe in cuts and bruises, soaking wet and covered in mud and blood. I won't go into how this experience changed me. It's depressing. But I will say that the thing that scares me the most is that they never even had a suspect. Despite him following me so closely, he was gone by the time my dad ran outside. That guy is still out there, and who knows what he is really capable of.
My mum had been a drug addict my entire life. When I was younger, she constantly had people coming and going, and it seemed that a majority of the time, these people were shady. What did I expect? I thought I'd share one experience that still bothers me quite a bit. I was about 12 years old at the time. I was sitting on the couch watching Drake and Josh when there came a knock at the door. My mum wasn't home at the time, so I decided to turn the TV off and remained quiet. "Eloise, you home?" It was a man. I just wanted to drop something off. "Eloise." I stayed quiet. "Eloise, open the damn door. I'm not gonna hurt you." At this point, I was scared. Even as a 12-year-old, when someone says they're not going to hurt you, there's generally something they did in the past that would prompt them to reassure someone of that. Right? He started rattling the door handle. "I swear to God, I will break this door down. You've been ignoring my calls, my texts. You cannot run from me." He began pounding and kicking at the door. I ran to the bathroom, because it was the only door with a lock, and hid in the bathtub with the curtain drawn. I decided to take my bath gun, as I was still young and had not yet outgrown playing with toys during bath time. I put a little water in it and a little shampoo in it. At that point, I heard what sounded like splitting wood, and then footsteps in my living room. I heard him go from room to room, all the while yelling, "Eloise, you can't ignore me now, you bitch." Finally, he came to the bathroom door and tried the handle. "Oh, so you're in there, huh?" More pounding. He kicked the door in and stood still for a few long moments before ripping open the curtain and peering down at me. He had slick black hair with piercing green eyes, a sad attempt at facial hair, black hooded sweatshirt, black jeans, black shoes, and he held a brown bag in one of his tattoo-covered hands. "Oh, even better. I've seen you around here before. You're Eloise's daughter. So sweet." He kept repeating that. "So sweet." It made my skin crawl. He walked over to the window and locked it before squatting next to me. "You're gonna come with me. How about that? I'll buy you some ice cream." I glared at him, trying my best not to look terrified. "Not much of a talker. Your mother could learn something from you." He reached his hand out and rested it on my shoulder. In one quick motion, I pulled my squirt gun from under my leg and began spraying it in his face. He didn't register it at first, but quickly began wiping his eyes. "What the fuck is this? What the fuck? What the fuck?" I hurled my body at him, causing him to fall back and hit his head on the toilet. I grabbed the brown paper bag and ran from the bathroom, out into the hallway and down the stairs. I caught my mum on the entrance steps and pulled her the other direction. "What's going on? You're making me drop my things." She quickly caught on that something was terribly wrong and ran with me to my aunt's house. After catching my breath, I described the man and what he did. She quickly recognized him as a man named Tony, whom she owed a lot of money to. I realized I was still holding the brown paper bag that the man had and gave it to my mum. She found a gun inside. He had showed up to kill my mother.
I live in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in northeast Georgia. It's a beautiful area with hundreds of miles of national forests, some great state parks, and a ton of fantastic camping places. Unfortunately, my hometown is also relatively poor. While there are some out-of-town residents from Atlanta and other places, a lot of people where I live are really poor. I do freelance work as a technical writer, so I can do most of my work online. If I didn't have that going for me, I'd have to move somewhere else. It's just one of those small towns that will rob you of your ability to accomplish anything in life if you stay there too long, without anything else going for you at least. Excluding a handful of doctors and lawyers and Georgia Power Company employees, the only employment in the area is at Walmart, fast food, and a couple of grocery stores. To the east of my town, there's a massive national forest. It's loaded with great camping sites and lots of relatively unused hiking trails. I really enjoy hiking on them with my dog, but it can be a bit of an unnerving experience sometimes. It's about a 10-mile drive from town, and there's no cell phone service or homes for miles. In the past, there have been lots of vehicle break-ins at the trailheads. The gravel parking lots at some of them glitter with bits of broken glass from what I'm guessing were car windows. Sometimes, there are really shifty people hanging around these trailheads or just driving around the Forest Service roads. These are really rough roads, and you'll see these beat-up $500 cars just barreling along roads meant for a 4x4. Some of the people you see in the cars look like the guy that got crushed by an ATM in Breaking Bad. All that being said, it's still a great place to camp. However, you just have to be careful. A few years ago, 2 of my friends and I decided to go play paintball in the National Forest. Probably not legal, I know. We decided to turn the paintball expedition into a camping trip so we could play the next morning too. After a pretty uneventful day of shooting paintballs at each other, we drive a couple of miles to one of the more popular camping spots. Unfortunately, a church group or something had taken up all the spots in the area. This is really the only camping spot that we were familiar with, and it was getting pretty late. We decide to keep on looking, so we drive for about an hour further and further into the woods. By this time, it's getting a bit dark, and we're getting a bit worried about finding a spot. We all had GPS on our smartphones, but none of us had any service. We turn off onto an unfamiliar road that isn't in very good shape. In fact, it looks like the Forest Service rangers used a backhoe to block off the road with a mound of dirt. A broken metal barrier lay in the woods nearby. That said, it looked like 4x4 vehicles had been going over the mound, so it was pretty worn down. Our F-150 had pretty high clearance, so we decided to go over the mound. There was an old gravel road on the other side, and the road was pretty much clear of debris. We drove a few miles down this road and came across an opening next to a small creek. There were some blue tarps hanging over a plywood table nailed to a tree, which seemed kind of odd. That said, it was pretty much dark at this point, and we didn't want to keep driving around all night looking for a camping spot. We left the truck light running, and we set up the tent. As we were setting up tent, I started to notice that there was a lot of trash in the surrounding woods. I see a green bottle laying on the ground. I take a look at the label, and I see that it's a bottle of Home and Garden insecticide. I was really tired at the time, and I just thought that someone had been dumping their home garbage out here. None of us thought it was weird that someone would be dumping garbage in an area that is more than an hour from the nearest home. We set up camp, had some beers, and made chili from scratch. By this time, it was probably around 11 p.m. As we were eating, we noticed a faint glow from the other side of a nearby hill. At first, we thought it was moonlight filtering its way through the trees. However, the angles didn't make sense. It didn't seem to be a bright light, and it wasn't moving. It was kind of like that glow you'd see over a bright city. We couldn't see the light's its source, though. Since there was no other access to roads in the area, we decided it wasn't other campers. The hill was about a quarter mile from our campsite, so we decided to go investigate. Under normal circumstances, I know I wouldn't have done so. However, we all had a few rum and cokes in our stomachs, and 2 of us, Jacob and I, decided to take a look. My other friend Isaac decides to stay behind to pop some popcorn over the fire. We start walking towards the light source, and the situation gets even stranger. All the trees in the area have their bark knocked off in a circle around their trunks. We thought it could have been the work of a beaver that lived in the creek, but it seemed strange that a beaver would go around to all these trees and just knock the bark off in a circle. Jacob and I start talking about the ghost beaver in pretty loud voices, probably due to our drunkenness. As we're almost to the top of the hill, Jacob tripped and yelled, "Oh shit!" A few seconds after he yelled, the light, whatever it was, went out. We looked at each other and decided that maybe we don't need to see what that light was after all. We walk back in silence and keep looking back every few seconds. We decide to turn off our flashlight and just use the moonlight to get back to the campsite. When we got a couple of 100 feet from the campsite, I can see my other friend Isaac walking around the campsite. He was wearing a hooded coat that I hadn't seen him wearing before. For some reason, he's carrying his paintball gun around in his hand. It seemed a little odd, we said to each other. The fire had started to die down, so we couldn't see our campsite very well. At this point, we'd probably been gone for almost an hour. From the distance, it looked like Isaac was looking for something. He kept walking around the site and was peering in the tent. When we were almost back to the campsite, we saw Isaac walk up to the road we came in on. We figured that he was going to go use the bathroom and didn't want to wander through the woods like us. When we got back, we sat next to the fire and waited for Isaac to come back. All of a sudden, we see him lurch out of the tent. He stumbles a few feet and vomits. After we left, he had a few more rum and cokes, he mumbles. We ask him why he kept wandering around the campsite with the paintball gun, and he gets a strange look in his face. "They're locked up in the cab of the truck. Did you unlock it?" We go and check the truck, enter the door code, and see all our paintball equipment just as we left it before. The keys to the truck were still hidden in a magnetic fob underneath. I get a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. "Isaac, what were you doing after we left?" I ask. I was just watching a movie on my phone, and then I fell asleep, I guess." "But you were walking around with your paintball gun, right? Did you just change jackets?" Isaac said he had been in the tent since we left, that he had been wearing the same unhooded fleece all night. Someone had been walking around our campsite, and it wasn't Isaac. At this point, all of us are way too drunk to drive, but we decide to go ahead and pack up and go back to my house for the night. We don't bother packing up the tent. We just fold it down with sleeping bags and everything in it. We jump in the F-150 and I start to drive out. When we get to the dirt hump, we see something gray blocking our path. The metal barrier that had been lying in the woods earlier is now back on its stand, right on top of the hump earlier. By this point, all of us had sobered up to the situation. No one wants to get out of the car to try to move the barrier. I had a metal guard in front of the F-150, so I drive forward slowly, tapping the metal barrier with the front of my truck. It falls right off. It must have just been balanced on top, and we drive slowly over it. We were terrified that it would pop one of the truck's tires as we drove over it, but it didn't. As we drive down the road, we see a vehicle following us with its lights off. It's probably about 1,000 feet behind us, but we keep catching glimpses of it as the moon reflects light off it. I start to drive as fast as I can on the Forest Service road, and the other vehicle keeps pace. It doesn't get any closer though. It stays just 1 or 2 turns behind us. We can only see it when the road straightens out. After about 45 minutes of speeding along gravel roads, we make it back to the main paved road. I start to drive everyone back to my house, but I decide to go a different way just to be safe. I didn't get pulled over for a DUI, luckily. Camping can be fun, but very rural camping can be dangerous. I've driven past that metal barrier since that time, but it's always been in place. I would never go down that road again.
For reference, I was a 19-year-old female at the time. Still female, of course, just a little older. I love camping. Anytime my friends and I came home from college, we would load up our cooler and beer, grab some gear, and go screw around outside. Unfortunately, when I was actually at school, none of my sorority sisters or other friends ever wanted to go with me, so I would often suffer withdrawals from camping. One day, the weather was way too nice to waste, so I grabbed some of my gear, hopped in a car I borrowed from a buddy, and drove to a spot that was secluded, yet within a safe distance to civilization, that I could run and get help. Camping also creeps me out sometimes, but that creepy feeling is also somewhat of a pulse for me. It's the same reason that people read these stories. It's fun to be scared. So I make a little camp and get a fire going. I hadn't brought all that much to eat, but I was enjoying myself. Reading and looking around the area, that sort of thing. I got the feeling I was being watched, and I stopped dead in my tracks. I hear a twig crunch over to my right, then see a doe bolt from 100 feet or so in front of me. I laughed at myself and went back to the camp with an armful of wood I had gathered. I kept freaking myself out, hearing sounds just outside of the ring of light casted by the fire. I always get inside my head, so I shrugged it off and kept whittling at the stick I had been messing with. Around 1, I decided to go into my tent and snuff out the lantern. I had been slamming beer in the most unladylike fashion, and smoking cheap cigars. Another reason I like camping. I can't act however I want. So I passed out relatively quick. About 2 a.m., I start hearing footsteps. They sound pretty light, and sort of timid. I think to myself that it's a deer or another animal. More likely a raccoon because I had probably left some food out. I'm still on guard though. About 30 minutes of sleeping with one eye open, I hear a rubbing noise. And the tent fabric is being pushed in a bit. I don't know how I didn't shit my sleeping bag, but I just sat there paralyzed with my ka bar in my hand. I desperately wanted to thrust the knife through the tent fabric, but I was still holding out hope that it was some of my buddies from the frat joking with me. And then, as sudden as it had begun, it all stopped. I was starting to feel slightly more secure, because daylight would be coming in about 2 or 3 hours. But I sure as shit wasn't going to go to sleep. All of a sudden at about 4 o'clock, I realized I should put my boots on so that if anything did happen, I would be ready. After having stayed up and keeping alert a little while longer, my friend's car alarm goes blaring. I freak the fuck out and run out of the tent. I got about 2 steps before something grabs me around the mouth. I open my mouth to scream, but instead the person's pinky finger slips between my teeth. I have heard that people can perform superhuman feats when they have huge adrenaline rushes. In my case, I just clamped down, and there's no way to say this without sounding ridiculous. His finger popped off. He screamed, pulled his hand away with his missing digit, falling to the ground. He took off running down the hill I was camping on. I took off right quick in the opposite direction. I must have looked ridiculous to people whose house I ran to. A little sorority girl in a wife beater, boxers, and steel-toed boots. I also had some blood that had oozed out of my lip, not from the finger, but because I have also managed to take a pretty big chunk out of my lip as well. I told them what happened. They called the police, got me some real clothing, and the man at the house made me a whiskey and coke. When the cops got there, they checked it out. The cops went to check it out, and when they came back, it was light out. They brought me back so I could get my friend's car, and what I saw just made me more scared. Right next to the tent was a red gas can. He could have just lit me on fire earlier. The finger was also gone, suggesting he had come back. The kicker is they never caught the guy. So somewhere out there is a man sitting down to dinner, maybe alone, maybe with a wife and a couple of kids, and he's missing his right pinky. Background. I work summers as a camp counselor in the northern part of Ontario, Canada. On the date this particular incident occurred, I was camping with a group of 10-year-old boys on the same lake the summer camp was based on. So, like a routine camping trip, we canoed out to the site and set up our tents. Me and my co-counselor, Mike, take turns supervising the kids while they swim, build forts and play games, etc. We cook some food over the fire, sit around and tell stories, cook s'mores, the typical Canadian camping experience. Around 9:30ish, I tell the kids it's time for bed, and they head into their tents, which were positioned a small walk away from the shoreline, but still in line of sight from where we had our fire pit. So the kids have gone to bed, and me and Mike are shooting the shit by the water, smoking a cigarette, just basically hanging out before we decided to head into our tents and call it a night. What happened next still troubles me to this day, and remains my go-to scary campfire story. We were both gazing into the pitch-black night water when we saw a small light approaching us slowly and slightly above water level. We speculated what it could possibly be for a few minutes, before it came close enough for us to see that it was mounted on the front of a kayak, and that someone was approaching our campsite. Now, it is important to note that as a camp counselor, part of our training goes over how to deal with stranger encounters in an environment where we are responsible for a group of children on a public property. I was prepared to give the mystery paddler the typical speech about how we are camping with a group from a recognized organization, and we would respectfully ask if they could find another campsite. However, this person's appearance shook me to the bone as the light drew nearer. Paddling this kayak was a woman who looked to be in her 60s. She had incredibly long wisps of gray hair that was trailing in the water. Her skin looked like old leather, and her dead-looking eyes were tough to spot under all her wrinkles. She looked directly at me, and when she spoke, I realized she was missing most of her teeth. "Are all your children safe in bed?" she asked, me pointing in the direction of the tents. Not really knowing how to respond and quite frankly shitting myself, I responded by telling her that they were fine and she had to leave. "That's good, just as expected for this time," she said with a smile, then turned her kayak and paddled off into the night. At this point in time, myself and Mike were legitimately very creeped out, not only by the appearance of this mystery woman, who resembled a freaking corpse, but also her inquiry on the whereabouts and safety of the kids we had brought on the trip. Not knowing what else to do, we grabbed our hunting knives and sat by the fire after checking on the kids. Half an hour later is where shit started to get really creepy. Across the lake, a female counselor was leading another trip for kids the same age group. She sent me a text which read something along the lines of, "Hey, Sean, stop screwing with us. This isn't funny. My kids are really creeped out." I instantly called her and let her know that I just saw someone near my campsite that seemed eerie, and that I was not trying to play a joke. Apparently one of their kids had opened their tent door to take a piss, and seen a woman with long hair standing with her arms open towards them near the shoreline.
In May 2009, I had just broken up with my girlfriend of almost 3 years. We had moved from Calgary to Toronto, and were still stuck living together after the breakup, as we didn't know many people in the city yet. Needless to say, the situation was pretty stressful and upsetting, so when a buddy I was going to school with at the time suggested a weekend camping/fishing trip, I jumped at the chance. He grew up in an area about an hour outside of Toronto called Flamborough. It's really beautiful. Loads of lush forest, farmers' fields, and small rivers and creeks. We decided to camp and fish along a creek called Grindstone Creek. It's close to some wetlands, and the fishing is supposed to be great. We ended up setting up our camp in what was probably a farmer's field, I'm guessing it was trespassing on our part, bordered by a gorgeous forest. We spent the evening fishing, shooting the shit, and drinking some quality craft beers. As it got darker, we made a little fire and roasted potatoes and hot dogs. All in all, it was a really good night. We turned in just after midnight, and we shared a tent. My buddy fell asleep before me, and I stayed up playing on my phone until probably about 1:30. I must have drifted off, because the next thing I remember was being woken up by a high-pitched yipping type noise. I was kind of groggy, and it took me a moment to fully wake up. The yipping was incessant, and it sounded like a weird coyote. I laid there for a moment listening, and then started playing on my phone again, and the noise was annoying as hell. I tried ignoring it, but it sounded like it was getting closer. Finally, it sounded like it had to be no more than 10 feet from the tent. At this point, I was getting a little unsettled. I had seen coyotes in Calgary before, and I thought of them as pretty harmless. They never looked much bigger than a smallish dog. But what if this one was rabid or something? What if it could smell our food? I had a pretty bad anxiety disorder, so I'm prone to worrying about these types of things. I nudged my buddy to see if he was awake, and he was. The noise woke him up too. We discussed what to do about the coyote, and as we hadn't brought anything to scare off critters, not a BB gun, nothing. Finally, he decided he would shine the flashlight on it and holler a lot, hopefully scaring him off. He unzipped the tent, and I watched him pointing the flashlight out into the darkness. I'll never forget what happened next. His leg suddenly went all wobbly, and he sort of stumbled backwards into the tent. He had a really dumbfounded look on his face when he looked at me and babbled, It's not a coyote. It's a dude. It's some weird dude. Normally, I would have thought he was messing with me. I'm a huge wimp and scare easily. I won't even watch horror movies. But I've never seen someone that looked that scared, and I never want to see that expression on someone's face again. So I knew he wasn't pulling my leg. The weird yipping and howling type noises were still going on, and in retrospect, it really didn't sound like a coyote, but I guess in our groggy states it was a way for our brains to make sense of it. Anyways, he kept telling me to just look out the tent flap, to make sure he's not crazy. At this point, I was having a full-blown anxiety attack. My heart was racing. I felt like shit, but I had to look. So I slowly peeked out the flap and waited for my eyes to adjust. And that's when I saw him. He was standing only a few arms' lengths away from the tent. He was swaying a little and wearing a baseball cap. What made it awful, though, what was really creepy, was that he was wearing women's lingerie. That's when I knew there was most likely something very wrong with this guy. If the making high-pitched noises at strangers' tents in the middle of the night didn't give it away. After I pulled my head back inside the tent, my buddy and I discussed what to do. Finally, we decided to yell at the guy to fuck off. My buddy started yelling, "Excuse me, can you fuck off? We're trying to sleep in here." The noise stopped. It was dead silent, and that's when we heard footsteps running towards our tent. They stopped right outside the tent, but we didn't waste any time, and we started yelling again. "Seriously, fuck off! We have a cell phone in here, and if you don't fuck off, we're going to call the cops." With that, we heard him walk by the tent and head off. Sounded like he was moving towards the road. Needless to say, we laid awake, petrified until the first sight of sunlight. Then we hightailed it the hell out of there. We discussed our experience on the way home, and were both pretty embarrassed about how scared we got. It definitely was not manly on either of our parts. And I think because we were both ashamed of how we let some weirdo freak us out so much, we really haven't ever talked about that day since.
I'm a uni student now, but this incident happened when I was in the 8th grade. When I was around 14, I studied a subject focusing on outdoor pursuits for our final assessment. 2 teachers took my class on a one-night camp where we could do activities like rock climbing, kayaking, trail walking, etc. I live in Australia, around an hour from a state forest that was notorious for the backpacker murders. Several bodies have been found, and several more remaining missing. I'm pretty sure all of the murders were linked to the same serial killer. Anyway, in the morning we leave the school and drive out in the bus. When we reach the road that leads to the entrance to the forest, a police car is parked to the side. He spoke to the teacher for a moment, but I didn't hear anything, and no one else seemed to notice or care. Fast forward a few hours, and we're trekked, about 20 of us, to the camping area, somewhere in the middle of the state forest. Some parts are state, some are privately owned, I think. Whilst kayaking that afternoon, we noticed a helicopter doing flybys, but again, my classmates never suspected anything. A couple of mates and I were the first to leave the water, and helped the teacher with some equipment and started building our own rafts. I was standing off to the side when one of the national park guides walked over to one of the instructors and talked in a hushed, slightly stressed out tone. I remember hearing the instructor say stuff like, "You're kidding. I don't believe it." He just looked shocked and taken aback. So at this point, I started connecting the dots, but I didn't say anything to my school friends. Around dusk that night, I got to use the toilet block, which is around 100 meters from the main campsite. As I go in, I remember a guy walking around the other side of the block. I didn't see him very clearly in the diminished light, but he kept glancing around, with nervous body language. I couldn't see his face clearly. He wasn't part of our party, and to me, it just didn't fit. I didn't think much of it at the time. Fast forward to the next morning, when we get back to the car park, the teacher tells us that a body was found in the dam, not far from where we were. They didn't want to tell us so as not to frighten us. We later found out it was a young guy who was killed with an axe, and the guy who did it was related to the serial killer who hunted in the same area. I don't know if that guy I saw had anything at all to do with the murders, but it freaked me out a lot afterwards. Haven't been camping since. This happened to my parents back in the late 80s. They were in their mid-20s when this all occurred. My parents decided to go camping in cool California. When they got there, it was kind of late. My mom was sitting down on a log while my dad was unpacking the truck. While sitting down, she heard walking from around the campsite. So she went and quietly told my dad she heard someone walking around. They got the fuck out of there, just in case. They drove about 3 miles down the road, with their headlights off, so they wouldn't be followed. Once they got there, they set up camp, and began to drink their asses off while listening to a boxing match on the radio. Eventually, they settled in for the night. Now, they don't know for sure that this next event is connected to the first, but they believe it is. So they settled in, and my dad was asleep far before my mom. My mom was in the halfway state where they're halfway awake and halfway asleep. Suddenly, she heard the footsteps outside the tent. She abruptly snapped back to consciousness and listened. She tried waking my dad, but he was way too out of it. She listened for what seemed like hours, when suddenly she hears, in the creepiest voice you could probably ever imagine, say, "Here I am. I'm going to kill you." While saying this, the man what she believes to be a knife along the tent. She could hear him walking and dragging the knife. She was literally frozen. She couldn't say anything or move. With her mouth agape, she finally snapped out of it and screamed, "Jim, grab the shotgun, kill that son of a bitch." With that, my dad finally awoke. They heard snapping in twigs and footsteps, and heard the guy running away. Of course, my parents didn't have a shotgun. It was a huge bluff that actually worked. My dad got up seconds later and began to run after him, but he was long gone. After that, my parents decided they were going to get the fuck out of there before anything else happened. When they saw their tires were slashed, they were in the middle of nowhere and no way out with a maniac that wanted to kill them. They actually tried blowing up their tires with one of those things you use to blow up rafts. Obviously, that didn't work, but they had to try, right? About an hour or so later, a ranger that was patrolling the area came along to help them out. He brought them back to town so that they can get their tires fixed. While talking to the ranger, they found out that he had been searching for any suspicious activity due to recent murders nearby. My parents were likely the murderer's next victims. I tried finding some of the murder cases online, but was unable to.
My mother recently told me this story. For years I had asked her if she ever tried acid, and she always denied it and got angry when I asked. A few nights ago, she finally broke down and said that she had taken acid a few times, but the last time she did it, she had a bad trip and never did it again. But this is the story she told me. In the summer of 1976, my mom got tickets to go see the Rolling Stones in New York City. She can't remember exactly where in the city. My mom and her 4 friends, they were all about 16 to 18, all got in my mom's car and drove down to the city from Albany, New York, where they lived. It's a good few hours from the city. They got to the show and met up with someone in the parking lot who was selling acid. So they bought some and took it right away. Halfway through the show, my mom started to have a very bad trip, and so did her other 4 friends. She said she had taken acid before, but this was the strongest she had ever taken. They all felt very overwhelmed and decided to leave the venue. They sat in the parking lot in the car. One of my mom's friends was hysterical by now and was getting out of control. My mom decided that she would try and drive back home. A few minutes into the drive, it started to rain really hard, and my mom realized there was no way that she could make it home on that much acid. So she parked the car on the side of the street in the Bronx and locked the doors. Most of the girls were trying to keep the other one under control, so my mom just curled up into a ball in the front seat and was trying to wait it out. An hour goes by, and the acid just seems to grow stronger, when she hears a knock on the window. She looks up to see a man knocking on her window and says, "Please let me in the car. It's raining out here. Let me sit in there till it stops." My mom was really confused and asked, "Are you real?" And she turned to her friends and asked, "Is this guy really here?" All the girls agreed that he was actually there, and they decided to let him in. 1970s was a different time. My mom goes to unlock it, but is having trouble. It's dark, and she's on a head full of acid. The guy starts to pound very heavily on the window now, shouting, "Let me in, you fucking whores!" My mom is still trying to open the car door, but just can't do it, and starts to cry. She looks up at the man, and the thought crossed her mind, "That's an ugly fat fucker." She says, I can't open the door." And the guy looks behind him and darts away. Another car was coming in their direction. My mom and her friends stayed in the car that night when it finally wore off, and they drove home the next morning. About a year later, my mother was working in a restaurant as a waitress, and a news break comes over the television. She had heard about the recent serial killer on the loose in New York City that has been going on since the summer before. When she looked at the TV, there was Son of Sam, David Berkowitz, a well-known serial killer, and the same man who was trying to get into my mother's car that night. At first, I didn't really believe my mom. Shit sounds so fake, and so I did some research. Here are some facts that do back up my mom's story. David Berkowitz was on a killing spree during July of 1976, the summer of the concert, to April 1977. He mostly attacked young women sitting in cars. He preferred his victims to have long, dark, wavy hair, which my mother and her two other friends had. In the summer of July, August, and September of 1976, David mostly killed in Queens and Bronx. He seemed to really dislike women, which makes sense of calling my mother a whore for no reason. I wonder why he didn't just shoot through the window, but my guess was since there was 5 girls, he may not have realized that at first, since 4 of them were crouched in the back, he wouldn't be able to kill all of them. So if my mom hadn't been having a bad trip on acid, she would have opened that door and, well, I don't want to think about that. Thank God for acid. I didn't accidentally stumble into LSD. I have done mushrooms about 5 to 6 times, the last being a year ago, and never experienced anything that resembled a bad trip. I have also read countless articles about LSD. I'm the type of person that likes to know exactly what to expect when taking any drugs. I knew exactly what to do to have a good trip and how to stop a bad trip once you feel it coming on. But sometimes, reading and learning cannot prepare you for what is to come. I'm not going to describe to you every detail of the trip because, to be completely honest with you, I'm not ready to even think about certain aspects of this trip. It literally scares me to the deepest parts of my soul. It happened last Friday night. I had been at a friend's house drinking. Mistake number 1. I would advise anyone thinking about doing LSD or even shrooms to not drink beforehand. It was a cold and rainy night. Mistake number 2. I would say that cold weather has a definite impact on a trip. I wouldn't necessarily say that you need to do it on a warm and sunny day, but those are the ideal conditions. We were going to head to a house party of another friend's, and right before leaving, my friend told me that he had a few hits of acid and asked me if I wanted to try some. I said sure. Mistake number 3 and 4. Do not suddenly do LSD. Try and plan your day around it, and know far in advance that you are going to be taking a trip. Also, I cannot tell you how important this one is. Do not take LSD or shrooms when you are going into a public setting with dozens of strangers. For the love of God, don't do it. This is what threw me into madness. Stay with close friends in a comfortable and familiar environment, and have no more than 3 or 4 other friends. The only reason I survived this night was because my overall mood was happy. Now, do not take shrooms or LSD if you're feeling sad or depressed. I can't fully remember the first 45 minutes of my journey because, like I said earlier, I was a little drunk. And then mistake number 5 happened. When I started realizing that the trip was about to start, I got really excited and kept telling my mind where I wanted it to go. I would advise against doing this. Just be relaxed, calm, and in a general happy mood. Don't try and tell your mind where to go. Just let it go. It took another 25 minutes of me just sitting there and waiting for the trip to start. I've read so many articles about the colors and imagery you see, but I kept focusing on objects that I thought would start to deform, but nothing did. Mistake number 6. You are not God. The trip will start sooner or later. Don't get sad that you aren't feeling any effects. For some people it takes 30 minutes to start. For others, it can take upwards of 2 hours. I knew this before I took the LSD, but for some fucking reason I didn't listen to the previous warning I had learned about. I started getting more depressed and thinking that I was different and that I wouldn't get to see anything out of the ordinary. Boy, was I fucking wrong. The next half an hour was about the same, and then it started. At first, it was beautiful. I was sitting in a room with 2 of my friends, and they were talking about just random things, but every word they spoke felt like it came right out of their mouth like a wave and absorbed into my body. I could feel their conversation. I took out my phone and started looking at my pictures. I spent a good 5 minutes, at least I think, but I can't be sure. At this point I was starting to lose my grasp on time, looking at each picture and observing the faces of my friends. The faces would change colors and start morphing. It felt like the faces were morphing into the representation of the person's soul. I don't really know how to describe it, but at the time I felt a complete and utter connection with each picture. People started coming into the room we were in, and I know for a fact that this was what completely turned what was previously a really great trip into the worst 6 hours of my entire life. I couldn't stand seeing new faces. My mind was telling me that these strangers knew nothing about me, and that no matter what I would say to them, they would never care. My friend, who was my babysitter or guide, saw that I was no longer smiling and took me out of the room and into the backyard right away. He told me to calm down and remember that I was tripping and that anything negative that was entering my mind wasn't reality. This gave me a sense of relief. For about 10 seconds,